$2 million invested in growing sounds like the end of every money worry. On paper, it puts a retiree in the top slice of Americans. Yet for a surprising number of households, that number does not create freedom, it creates paralysis. Year after year, they withdraw barely 2% from a portfolio that research says could safely support almost twice that. Their account balance climbs. Their healthiest years quietly slip away. How did retirement become a place where more money creates more fear, not more options? And what if the real risk now is not going broke, but never really living? In most retirement conversations, one fear dominates everything else: the fear of running out of money. It appears in surveys, headlines, and late-night worries around the kitchen table. For people with modest savings, that fear can be very real. But for households entering retirement with portfolios in the $1 to $3 million range, another pattern quietly appears in the data. Their portfolios are not collapsing. In many cases, their balances are still growing. What is shrinking is not the money, but the life they allow themselves to live. Planners sometimes talk about a consumption gap. In this context, it is more accurate to call it an enjoyment gap. It is the space between what a retiree could safely spend from their investments each year, based on sensible planning, and what they actually spend. The wider that gap becomes, the more experiences, memories, and choices are left unused until it is too late to enjoy them. Understanding this gap starts with the idea of a safe withdrawal rate. For a traditional 30-year retirement, a simple rule of thumb has often been that starting around 4% of the portfolio value in the first year, then adjusting that dollar amount for inflation, would have historically survived even some of the worst sequences of market returns. For people retiring earlier, in their 50s or early 60s, many planners will lean toward a lower floor, somewhere in the 3 to 3.5% range, to reflect a longer horizon and a desire for extra safety. Yet when researchers look at actual behavior, another story emerges. Many retirees with substantial savings are not withdrawing 3.5% or 4%. They are withdrawing closer to 2 to 2.5%. Some are spending less than the income from guaranteed sources like Social Security and pensions, allowing even that to partially pile up in cash or unused balances. In other words, they are living as if every year might be the one where everything goes wrong, even when their plan can already handle many of those bad scenarios. All of this is happening against the backdrop of changing lifespans and changing lifestyles. Someone who leaves full-time work at 58 and lives into their 80s or 90s is facing not just old age, but three different phases: the energetic go-go years, the slower slow-go years, and the limited no-go years. A dollar spent at 60 buys something very different from that same dollar at 85. It buys hiking trips instead of hospital parking. It buys long flights instead of short walks down the hallway. So a quiet but urgent question appears. If the math says there is room to spend more, but behavior stays frozen in maximum caution mode, what exactly is being protected? The portfolio or a lifetime of habits and fears? For most workers, the story of money begins with a warning. There will not be enough. From the first day a new employee sits through an HR orientation, the message is repeated in different forms. Start saving now, compound interest rewards, early action. No one will rescue you if you fall behind. Charts show rising lines for those who save and flat lines for those who do not. Retirement is framed as a finish line only reachable through constant contribution and restraint. Over time, this message does exactly what it intends. It shapes behavior. People automate contributions into 401s, CAEs, and IRAs. They say no to certain trips, cars, and restaurants. They move money from checking into investment accounts month after month. When markets cooperate, those accounts grow. When markets stumble, the habit of saving through downturns is praised as discipline. Each promotion or raise becomes partially a fuel source for the next round of contributions. After 20 or 30 years, this pattern does more than fill accounts. It forms an identity. The saver is no longer simply someone who puts money aside. The saver becomes the responsible one, the careful one, the person who does not make stupid purchases, who does not blow money on frivolous experiences, who stays in control. Culturally, this identity is rewarded. Friends and family may comment on how good someone is with money. Articles celebrate early savers. Financial calculators display reassuring green bars when contribution rates are high. The problem appears when the goal quietly shifts. At some point, the task is no longer accumulating. It is converting what has been accumulated into a life. Retirement planning software might show that a given portfolio can sustain a certain level of spending with a strong probability of success. But the person using that software is not a blank slate. That person has spent decades linking safety with not touching principle, with saying no more often than yes. In this light, the reluctance to spend is not irrational. It is entirely consistent with everything that worked before. The same mindset that prevented lifestyle inflation at 35 is now applied at 65. The same suspicion of unnecessary spending that kept credit card debt low is now applied to a trip with grandchildren or a kitchen renovation that would make staying at home more enjoyable. The environment has changed. The script inside the saver's head has not. This is why some retirees describe a strange experience when they first see a large number on a statement. Relief appears for a moment, then a new fear takes its place, the fear of watching that number go down. The saver has been trained to see a falling balance as failure, regardless of whether the spending behind it is reckless or carefully planned. A planned 3.5% withdrawal and an impulsive spending spree look identical on a chart. The line dips. The saver's nervous system reacts the same way to both. So retirement arrives, but the mental model remains. Bigger number equals safety, smaller number equals danger. If that equation has been running in the background for most of an adult life, how likely is it that a single meeting or a single spreadsheet can rewrite it? And if the identity of protector has been built over decades, how easily can someone step into the unfamiliar role of user or enjoyer of the wealth they once guarded? If decades of saving build the habit, the modern information environment keeps that habit on high alert. Even for retirees with strong balance sheets, the outside world rarely sends a calm message. Instead, it pulses with warnings. A red banner flashing across a financial news channel, a headline predicting the next crash, a podcast episode on the coming retirement crisis, a viral post about Social Security running out. Each piece on its own may be incomplete. Together, they form a constant background noise of danger. Markets themselves are naturally volatile. They fall quickly and rise slowly. A 20% decline can happen in months, while recovering that same ground may take years. For someone still working and contributing, these swings are unpleasant but often manageable. For someone already retired, no longer bringing in a paycheck, the same swings feel different. A drop in the market can look, on a screen, like a direct attack on their future. Layered on top of this volatility is a stream of narrative. News outlets are rewarded with attention when they highlight drama, not when they quietly note that long-term returns have averaged out over decades. Stories about people who lost everything in a crash spread faster than stories about those who stayed the course and did fine. Algorithms on digital platforms notice what users click on and show them more of the same, often amplifying fear-based content without any malicious intent, simply because fear keeps people engaged. In this environment, it becomes easy for the mind to build mental movies. A retiree sees a 10% drop in the market and does not simply register temporary fluctuation. Instead, the mind jumps forward 20 or 30 years. Images appear of being very old, very frail, with no money left. The fact that their current plan may already be built to withstand such drops does not erase the emotional weight of that image. Data moves slowly. Imagination moves instantly. At the same time, technical topics like inflation, interest rates, and government debt are often presented in ways that sound apocalyptic. A single chart of rising national debt can be enough to make a retiree feel that everything is beyond repair, even if their personal plan, with its own buffers and guardrails, remains sound. Social Security discussions often focus on insolvency dates without equally explaining that ongoing payroll taxes still support a large portion of benefits. The nuance is complex. The headline is simple: trouble ahead. Inside this fear machine, the cautious retiree has their instincts constantly validated. They may think, this is why I cannot increase my spending. Look at what is happening. Every new headline becomes evidence that spending a little more on travel or experiences would be reckless. The fact that they have a carefully constructed plan, perhaps tested across hundreds of hypothetical market scenarios, is overshadowed by one dramatic story of someone who retired right before the crash. The result is a kind of emotional mismatch. The plan might be designed around probabilities, diversification, and flexible withdrawals. The retiree's nervous system, however, is reacting to one scenario, the absolute worst case, amplified and replayed. If every piece of news is interpreted as a preview of that worst case, how could anyone feel safe drawing down their savings at the rate the numbers suggest is reasonable? This raises a critical question. When a retiree insists they just cannot spend more, is that conclusion coming from their financial plan or from the accumulation of headlines, market dips, and stories that have quietly trained them to expect disaster at every turn? Beneath the fear and habit lies another quiet force, confusion about the math itself. Many retirees have heard of the 4% rule or the idea of a safe withdrawal rate, but the details are often fuzzy. Some believe that withdrawing 4% guarantees they will never run out of money. Others think it is far too risky in a world that feels more uncertain than the past. Few see it for what it really is, a conservative floor built from historical worst-case scenarios, not a dare to spend recklessly. In its original form, the classic 4% guideline asked a simple question. If someone retired for 30 years, invested in a balanced portfolio, and started by withdrawing 4% of their initial balance in year one, then increased that dollar amount with inflation each year, would they have run out of money in the worst market environments on record? The surprising answer looking backward was no. Even in periods that included severe crashes and inflation spikes, that starting rate survived 30 years in almost all cases. For people who retire earlier, with potentially 35 or 40 years ahead, planners often dial this starting rate down to around 3 to 3.5%. Not because the future is guaranteed to be worse, but because a longer timeline leaves more room for unexpected events. Even at these lower rates, the research still assumes that someone sticks with a sensible mix of stocks and bonds, does not panic sell everything at a bottom, and allows markets time to recover over decades. Now compare this to how many affluent retirees actually behave. Instead of starting around those conservative floors, they often withdraw around 2 to 2.5%. For a $2 million portfolio, 2% means $40,000 per year. If Social Security or a pension covers part of their budget, their investment withdrawals may be even smaller. On paper, the plan looks nearly unbreakable. In practice, the lifestyle that money could support is never fully experienced. A simple comparison makes the gap clear. Imagine two retirees with $2 million invested. Both have similar ages, similar health, similar time horizons. The first, driven by fear, limits withdrawals to 2% per year, or $40,000 from investments, perhaps layering that on top of Social Security. The second, after carefully reviewing their plan and building in buffers, starts at a 3.5% withdrawal rate, or $70,000, with the flexibility to adjust if markets perform poorly. Over a single year, the difference is $30,000. Over 10 years, even before accounting for inflation, that is $300,000 of additional experiences for the second retiree. It can mean more travel, more time with faraway family, more support for causes they care about, or simply more comfort day to day. Meanwhile, the first retiree may see their portfolio values stay flat or even grow, and take that as proof that being extremely cautious was the right choice. The misunderstanding is subtle. Many believe that any drawdown, any decline in the account balance, is a sign of failure. They treat the portfolio as something that must be preserved at all costs, as if the goal were to hand back the full amount untouched. In reality, the purpose of a retirement plan is not to keep the number on the screen as high as possible until the last moment. It is to convert that number into a stream of spending that supports a life. Safe withdrawal research does not promise perfection. It acknowledges uncertainty, stress test plans against harsh conditions, and then says, in essence, even if things go badly, this starting point has held up in the past. It assumes that markets will sometimes fall, that headlines will sometimes be frightening, and that balances will move up and down. The emotional interpretation, however, often turns this into a different rule. If the balance ever goes down, something has gone terribly wrong. This gap between mathematical intent and emotional interpretation is powerful. It is what allows someone with a robust plan, multiple layers of safety, and a high probability of success to still feel as if one extra trip or one home upgrade will somehow tip everything over the edge. If the numbers say you can safely do more, but the feelings say you must not, which voice tends to win in daily decisions? In many ways, they were the ideal clients. A couple in their late 50s, both with long careers behind them, two grown children, and a neat, carefully organized stack of financial statements. Their combined portfolio had grown to roughly $2.5 million spread across 401s, ARAs, and a taxable brokerage account. Their mortgage was small enough to be manageable, their cars were paid for, and they had no high-interest debt. On every traditional measure, they had won the retirement game. A planning analysis painted a reassuring picture. Even using conservative assumptions, a 3.5% starting withdrawal rate, modest investment returns, inflation that was slightly higher than recent history, their plan looked strong. A Monte Carlo simulation, which tested their finances against hundreds of possible market paths, still showed a high probability that their money would last well into their 90s, even if they increased their spending in the early years. The numbers did not simply suggest survival, they suggested room. Yet the way they lived told a different story. In practice, their withdrawals hovered closer to 2% of their portfolio each year. They declined invitations to long overseas trips with their adult children, citing uncertainty and bad timing. Instead of replacing a car that had become increasingly uncomfortable for longer drives, they chose to keep repairing it. They rarely stayed in the kind of hotel they would have once described as a splurge. Their evenings were often spent scrolling through account balances, reading financial news, and discussing whether the market looked dangerous. In conversation, their fears sounded familiar. What if there was a major crash? What if inflation stayed high for a decade? What if one of them needed extensive long-term care? Each scenario was possible. None of them had been ignored in the plan. Yet the emotional weight of those what-ifs seemed to overshadow the reality of their current situation. They had strong Social Security benefits scheduled to begin at different points, a strategy to delay one benefit to increase the survivor's income, and a diversified portfolio designed to weather volatility. Still, any suggestion of spending more was met with hesitation. The planning software told one story. Even under stress, their money was likely to outlast them, and it was entirely reasonable to increase travel and discretionary spending in their go-go years. Their behavior told another story. The measure of safety was not probability, but the visual stability of their account balance. As long as the line on the chart stayed flat or trended up, they felt comfort. Any dip, even for planned, purposeful reasons, felt like stepping too close to an edge. There were glimpses of regret. When their daughter mentioned a hiking trip she wanted to take while her joints were still strong enough for steep trails, they answered with, "Maybe after things calm down in the markets." When their son suggested a multi-generation vacation before his own children became teenagers and too busy for family travel, the response was, "We should wait until we see how the economy does this year." Each time the implication was the same. The future would offer a safer, more certain moment to say yes. Years began to pass. Their portfolio, despite modest withdrawals and the usual ups and downs, continued to grow. Their children's lives grew busier. Health remained good, but small aches and doctor's visits became more frequent topics of conversation. The window for certain kinds of experiences, while not closed, was gradually narrowing. This couple did not fail to plan. They did not ignore risk. They did not live extravagantly, nor did they make a catastrophic financial mistake. Their error, if it can be called that, lay in a mismatch between what their numbers could support and what their fears would permit. The result was a retirement that looked secure on paper and restrained in practice. The uncomfortable question is not just about them, it is broader. How many households with similar balances, similar fears, and similarly cautious behavior are quietly slipping into the same pattern? And if careful planning reveals that there is space to live more fully, but that space is never used, what exactly is all the planning for? When viewed from a distance, the oversaving trap can look abstract, like a theoretical problem only planners talk about. Up close, the difference it makes is concrete. Two retirees can have almost identical balance sheets and completely different lives, simply because one treats their plan as something to use and the other treats it as something to guard. Imagine two households each entering retirement with a $2 million portfolio, similar ages, similar health, and no high-interest debt. Both have planned for a long horizon, potentially 30 years or more. Both have Social Security benefits lined up and some flexibility in where they live and how they spend. On paper, they appear nearly interchangeable. The first household, heavily influenced by fear, caps withdrawals at 2% per year. That translates to $40,000 withdrawn from investments, layered on top of Social Security. They rarely allow themselves discretionary upgrades. Travel is modest and infrequent. Home improvements are delayed until something is truly broken. They keep a close eye on financial news and treat any market decline as a reason to tighten further. The second household, after working through a detailed plan and building in stress tests, starts with a 3.5% withdrawal rate and accepts the idea of small, temporary adjustments if markets perform badly. Their initial withdrawal from investments is $70,000 per year, again layered on top of Social Security. They choose to front-load certain experiences while health is strongest, trips they had postponed, time-intensive hobbies, in-person gatherings with distant relatives and friends. Over a single year, the difference in spending is $30,000. Spread across daily life, it can mean staying closer to family during holidays, choosing itineraries and accommodations that make travel less exhausting, or simply having more room for small pleasures without constant guilt. Over a decade, the cumulative difference is $300,000, not as a lump sum sitting in an account, but as a series of lived moments. From a portfolio perspective, both plans might be considered safe. The fear-driven household's portfolio may even grow in real terms if markets cooperate, reinforcing their belief that caution was wise. The evidence-based household's portfolio may fluctuate more visibly, but still remain on track, especially if they are willing to trim discretionary spending after deep market declines. On a chart, the difference between the two lines might not be dramatic. In their memories, the gap is much larger. This raises a pressing question. When success is measured only by the final number on a statement, what invisible costs are being ignored? A plan that never fails because spending was kept artificially low may offer statistical comfort, but it may also represent a long series of chances never taken. The consequences are not limited to money or missed vacations. They ripple through families and communities. When a retiree stays in the workforce 5 or 10 years longer than necessary, the extra income certainly adds to their accounts. At the same time, those years are taken from a finite window when energy, mobility, and curiosity are at their peak. Time with adult children who are still nearby, with grandchildren before they become teenagers, or with parents before their own health declines cannot be banked in the same way. Inside the home, chronic financial caution can create a subtle tension. One partner may be more willing to spend on experiences, while the other is anchored to a sense of looming danger. Discussions about travel, home projects, or gifts can turn into quiet conflicts, not because the money is unavailable, but because the psychological threshold for safe spending has been set so low. Over time, the more cautious partner may feel unappreciated for protecting the family, while the other feels unheard about wanting to enjoy what they have built. There is also an intergenerational dimension. Many retirees express a desire to leave something meaningful to their children or to causes they care about. This goal is entirely valid. But when the desire to preserve an inheritance overshadows the opportunity to share life together now, a trade is being made, often unconsciously. Children may inherit substantial financial assets decades later. What they cannot inherit are the trips that never happened, the shared traditions that were always postponed, the version of their parents who was relaxed enough to be fully present. On a broader scale, when large groups of financially secure retirees consistently underspend, the effects extend beyond individual families. Local businesses, travel industries, and charities all feel the absence of demand that could have been safely met. A generation that worked hard, invested consistently, and navigated complex careers may unintentionally pass through its healthiest years as an underutilized economic and social force. None of this suggests that every retiree with significant savings should dramatically increase spending without thought. The point is more nuanced. A plan that is mathematically safe but emotionally unused has costs that do not appear on balance sheets. It affects relationships, memories, health, and even how a person understands the meaning of all those years of work. If the consequence of constant caution is a retirement that is financially strong but emotionally thin, then the oversaving trap is not a minor technical issue. It is a quiet reshaping of what those years are allowed to be. The question then becomes unavoidable. If the numbers already suggest that more is possible, what would it take to give yourself permission to live a version of retirement that makes full use of the time and resources you have? If the oversaving trap is built from habits, fear, and misunderstood math, escaping it requires more than a single chart or reassuring sentence. It requires a different definition of success, a new set of rules for spending, and a deliberate effort to align money with the life it was meant to support. The first step is to redefine what winning looks like in retirement. For many savers, success has long meant watching their account balance rise. A year when the number is higher feels good. A year when it is lower feels dangerous. In accumulation years, that instinct serves a purpose. But in retirement, clinging to that same metric can quietly turn money into something that must be defended instead of something that can be used. A healthier definition of success might sound different. Being able to meet essential needs, absorb shocks, and still fund a meaningful set of experiences over a lifetime. In that frame, a portfolio that ends slightly smaller but funded years of travel, time with family and personal projects, has done its job better than one that grows untouched while life remains constrained. The question shifts from how big can the number get to how well can this number support the life that matters to me? From there, retirees can move to building a clear conservative floor for spending. This is not about guessing or hoping. It is about using the same research that fueled the 4% guideline and its more conservative variants to define an annual spending level that is intentionally designed to be robust, even in difficult markets. For a long retirement horizon, this might mean selecting a starting rate around 3 to 3.5%, adjusting for factors like other income sources, risk tolerance, and flexibility. This floor is not a ceiling, it is a minimum permission. It represents the amount a retiree can spend each year with a high degree of confidence that their plan will survive, even if markets deliver a rough sequence. Treating this floor as a non-negotiable right, rather than a dangerous maximum, can begin to unwind the reflex to underspend. It gives structure to the vague idea of, I think I can afford this, and replaces it with, according to this plan, I am supposed to spend at least this much. Once a floor is established, the next step is to layer on guardrails for flexible spending. Instead of a single fixed number, retirees can divide their budget into essentials and discretionary categories. Essential spending covers housing, food, insurance, basic transportation, and healthcare. Discretionary spending covers travel, hobbies, gifts, and upgrades. The key is to allow discretionary spending to move up and down in response to actual market results, rather than in response to fear alone. A simple framework might look like this. When portfolios are at or above certain target levels, full discretionary spending is allowed. If the portfolio dips below a predefined threshold, discretionary spending is temporarily reduced, not eliminated, until balances recover. If markets fall sharply, a retiree might agree to pause major discretionary items for a year or two while essential spending remains fully funded. This approach is grounded in the reality that worst-case periods do occur, but also that they do not last forever. By using guardrails, retirees avoid two extremes, pretending that markets never change and reacting to every headline as if it demands a permanent lifestyle downgrade. They shift from an emotional response, everything feels dangerous, so I must always spend less, to a rule-based response. If this measurable condition appears, I temporarily adjust spending in this specific way. This preserves both safety and the possibility of enjoyment. Finally, there is the work that cannot be done by formulas alone. the emotional and practical commitment to change. This might involve naming a short list of experiences that feel most urgent in the next 5 to 10 years. A particular trip, hosting family gatherings, supporting a cause, or creating a space at home that makes daily life richer. It can mean deciding in advance that a certain percentage of the portfolio will be intentionally converted into experiences during the go-go years, rather than left as an abstract number. Some retirees find it helpful to schedule regular reviews, not only of their portfolio, but of their life. What did the money make possible this year? What memories were created that would not have existed if fear had made every decision? Those questions keep the focus on the purpose of the money, not just its preservation. The future for retirees caught in the oversaving trap is not about swinging to the opposite extreme and ignoring risk. It is about acknowledging that risk exists in two directions: the risk of running out and the risk of never using what was saved. A well-designed plan, with clear floors, thoughtful guardrails, and intentionally chosen experiences, is one of the few tools that can address both. If the years ahead are going to look different from the decades of accumulation behind, then the rules for what counts as responsible must evolve as well. The question is no longer only, will the money last? It becomes, more honestly, will the life last if the money is never truly used? By the time someone reaches a $1 to $3 million portfolio, the public story about their finances is simple. They are safe. The private story is often more complicated. Years of disciplined saving, a constant stream of alarming headlines, and a deep misunderstanding of safe withdrawal math can combine into a powerful message. No matter how much you have, it is never quite enough to relax. The result is the oversaving trap. Portfolios survive. Many even grow. But whole chapters of life go underfunded. The go-go years, when energy and health are strongest, are quietly spent in a posture of maximum caution. Time that could have been traded for experiences is instead traded for slightly larger numbers on a screen. If there is a single lesson in this, it is that retirement risk is two-sided. There is the obvious risk of running out of money. There is also the less visible risk of never drawing down what was saved to create the life it was meant to support. Good planning acknowledges both. It uses research to define conservative floors, guardrails to adapt to real-world markets, and intentional choices to convert abstract wealth into concrete memories. For anyone watching this and recognizing a piece of their own story, the next step is not to spend recklessly. It is to ask better questions. What does winning look like now that the accumulation race is largely over? What experiences matter enough to be funded on purpose in the next 5 to 10 years? And if a careful plan already suggests there is room to live more fully, what belief or fear is still holding the brakes? If this conversation resonates, consider sharing it with someone you know who is rich on paper, but still living like disaster is just around the corner. Subscribe for more deep dives like this, and in the comments, answer one simple question. If you knew your retirement plan could safely support a bit more joy, what is one thing you would stop postponing?